In 1968, inside Ford's massive engine plant in Lima, Ohio, molten iron poured into fresh molds. The air was thick with heat. Workers moved carefully around casting lines that ran 24 hours a day. The molds were bigger than anything Ford had cast for passenger cars before. When the blocks cooled, they weighed over 700 pounds bare. Massive, thick cylinder walls, huge main journals, deep skirts that extended well below the crankshaft centerline. This wasn't some high-revving small block designed to scream at 7,000 RPM. This was 460 cubic inches of pure American excess. But here's the part most people don't know. By the time this engine was ready to dominate the streets, the world had already started turning against it. Regulations were coming. Insurance companies were watching every horsepower rating like hawks circling prey. Gas prices were about to explode in ways that nobody in Detroit could have predicted, and the engine that should have ruled the 1970s got left behind before it ever had its moment. You think you know the story of Ford's big blocks? Not like this. Because the 460 wasn't just big, it was brilliant, and in the right hands, it was absolutely terrifying. The late 1960s were a war zone. Every manufacturer was throwing cubic inches at the problem of speed. Ford had its FE series engines, the 390, the 427, the 428 Cobra Jet. They were legends. They won races at every level of competition. They powered Mustangs through quarter-mile traps. They pushed Galaxies sideways through corners at NASCAR superspeedways. They turned Fairlanes into street weapons that nobody expected. They were already icons before the decade ended. But internally, Ford engineers knew something uncomfortable, something they didn't talk about in press releases or dealer meetings. The FE architecture dated back to the 1950s. It was conceived in an era when engineers had different priorities. By 1960s standards, it was heavy, expensive to build. The casting process was complex and required multiple machining operations that drove up production costs. Tooling was wearing out, and emissions standards were tightening every single year with no signs of stopping. The future wasn't going to be forgiving to engines designed in Eisenhower's America. So Ford did something bold, something that would shape their big block strategy for decades. They designed an entirely new big block family from scratch. Not an evolution, not a revision, a complete clean sheet design that threw away everything they'd learned from the FE and started over with modern manufacturing in mind. It was called the 385 series, named after the 3.85-inch crankshaft stroke of the Ford i60's smaller sibling, the 429. Clean sheet design, wider bore spacing that allowed for bigger cylinders without compromising block strength, thin wall casting technology that reduced weight while maintaining rigidity, lower production cost per unit, higher potential for future development. It was everything the FE wasn't: modern, efficient to manufacture, and built for whatever the future might demand. The 460 debuted for the 1968 model year in the Lincoln Continental. Not a Mustang, not a Mach 1, not a drag strip special with racing stripes and hood scoops. A luxury yacht designed to float executives down highways in absolute silence. That alone should tell you something about Ford's intentions. With a 4.36-inch bore and a 3.85-inch stroke, the 460 displaced exactly 460 cubic inches. That's 7.5 liters for those who prefer metric. Compression ratio in early versions was a healthy 10.5.1, high enough to extract serious power from premium fuel. With a single 4-barrel carburetor breathing through a cast iron intake manifold, it made 365 horsepower at 4,600 RPM and a crushing 485 lb-ft of torque at just 2,800 RPM. Think about that for a second. Let it sink in. 485 pound-feet of torque before the tachometer even hits 3,000 RPM. This wasn't an engine that needed to scream to make power. It didn't need to wind up through the rev range like a European sports car. It didn't rely on peaky cam profiles or aggressive valve timing. It shoved, it pushed, it delivered thrust like a freight train leaving the station, relentless, unstoppable, and completely effortless. And yet, it entered the world quietly. No racing debut at Le Mans, no drag strip headlines in Hot Rod magazine, no press releases bragging about quarter-mile times. It was moving 2.5-ton Lincolns in near silence. Effortless acceleration from stoplight to stoplight. Smooth highway cruising at speeds that would get you arrested. Civilized behavior that suited doctors and lawyers and corporate executives. But inside that block was something far more serious than luxury car duty required. The 460 shared its architecture with the 429, including the famous semi-hemispherical combustion chambers that appeared in Cobra Jet and Super Cobra Jet variants. The chamber design promoted excellent flame propagation and allowed for large valves without shrouding. The bore size, 4.36 inches, was enormous by any standard. The block had enough material in the cylinder walls to support serious overbores for future displacement increases. Main bearing journals were massive, spread across 5 main caps that were designed to handle far more stress than any production application would ever demand. The bottom end was stout, overbuilt, almost paranoid in its strength. Ford engineers knew this thing could take punishment they would never publicly admit to designing for. But there was a problem that had nothing to do with engineering. The muscle car era was peaking in 1969 and 1970. Insurance companies had noticed what was happening. Young drivers were wrapping high horsepower cars around telephone poles. Claims were skyrocketing, and the industry responded by targeting high horsepower vehicles with premiums that sometimes exceeded the monthly car payment. The 429 Cobra Jet went into the Mustang and made headlines. The 460 didn't. Ford made a calculated decision based on reality, not glory. The 460's torque output was so astronomically high that stuffing it into mid-size cars would have created immediate traction nightmares. Even with the best tires available, putting 485 lb-ft through a live rear axle in a 3,500-pound car was asking for broken axle shafts and shredded differentials. And warranty disasters that would cost Ford millions. So the 460 got typecast, labeled, put in a box it would never escape. It went into full-size sedans where the weight could absorb the torque. Lincolns, Mercury Marquis, Thunderbirds that weighed as much as small boats. Later, trucks that could actually use what it offered. Never the hero car, always the supporting actor. And just as it was hitting its stride, just as engineers were starting to understand what the platform could really do, everything changed. In 1970, compression ratios across all of Detroit started to fall. The Clean Air Act loomed over every engineering decision. Catalytic converters were coming, and they couldn't survive leaded fuel. By 1971, the 460's compression dropped from 10.5Y1 down to around 8.5.1 to accommodate lower octane unleaded gasoline. Horsepower ratings fell from 365 gross horsepower to roughly 245 net horsepower by 1972 under the new SAE net rating system that measured output at the flywheel with all accessories attached. On paper, it looked like the 460 had been completely neutered, like all the promise had been drained out. Most people stopped paying attention. The magazines moved on. The conversation shifted to survival rather than performance. But here's what they missed. Even in low compression, emissions-controlled form, the 460 still made mountains of torque. In 1973, a typical 460 in a full-size Ford made around 365 lb-ft of torque under net ratings. That's still more than most engines made at their peak. In trucks, especially by the late 1970s, torque figures climbed back up near 400 lb-ft as Ford optimized the calibration for working applications. It was the kind of torque that could tow 10,000 pounds up a mountain grade without breaking a sweat. The kind of torque that could pull a construction trailer through mud that would stop lesser vehicles dead, and Ford knew exactly what they had. By the mid-1970s, performance cars were dying. Mustangs had become economy cars with tape stripes. Camaros were putting out embarrassing numbers. But trucks weren't dying. The working truck market was growing. The recreational vehicle market was exploding. And suddenly, the 460 found a second life where it truly belonged. It went into F-Series pickups, especially the F-250 and F-350 where serious work got done, into motorhomes that weighed more than some houses, into commercial chassis that delivered goods across continents, into ambulances that needed to move fast with life on the line, into heavy-duty applications that would have destroyed lesser engines. But even then, there were headaches that engineers had to solve. Early oiling systems could suffer under sustained high RPM abuse. Not catastrophic failures like some other big blocks experienced, but oil control at extended highway speeds in heavy vehicles became a documented concern. The oil pump was working hard at 4,000 RPM for hours at a time during highway towing. Engineers revised oil pump designs in later production years. Improved windage control with better baffling inside the oil pan. Upgraded the pickup tube design to handle sustained angles during heavy braking while towing. These were lessons learned from real-world fleet feedback. Emissions equipment added complexity that mechanics hated. EGR valves that clogged, smog pumps that added parasitic drag, vacuum lines running everywhere like spaghetti, connecting systems that seemed designed to fail. The simple elegance of the original design got buried under government-mandated additions. And fuel economy? Let's be completely honest. Single digits under load. 8 miles per gallon was optimistic when pulling a trailer. 6 wasn't unusual in mountain grades. During the 1973 oil crisis, when gas stations ran dry and prices tripled overnight, that became a public relations nightmare. Suddenly, a 460-powered Lincoln that struggled to hit 12 miles per gallon on the highway looked irresponsible, wasteful, completely out of touch with reality. Newspaper editorials asked why anyone needed this much engine, so Ford detuned it further. Cam profiles softened to reduce overlap. Timing retarded to lower combustion temperatures. Carburetor jetting leaned out to the ragged edge of drivability. By the late 1970s, some 460s were rated at just 212 horsepower, 212 horsepower, for 460 cubic inches of displacement. It sounded tragic, pathetic even. The numbers suggested an engine that had given up. But numbers can lie, and these numbers lied constantly. Even at 212 horsepower, these engines were virtually indestructible in stock form. The thick cylinder walls that were designed for potential overbores now simply lasted forever at stock displacement. The forged crankshafts that Ford used in early production years were overbuilt by a factor of 3 for the loads they actually saw. Huge bearing surfaces spread wear so thin that 200,000 miles didn't faze them. The engine was massively overbuilt for the low RPM, detuned life it was now forced to live. And then something interesting happened. Hot rodders started paying attention. The same people who had ignored the 460 when it was new started finding them in junkyards for almost nothing. Because here was the dirty secret that Ford never advertised. The 460's block design was actually better for big displacement builds than the older FE engines that had all the glory. The 4.36-inch bore allowed massive valves that could flow air like nothing else Ford had built. Aftermarket heads eventually unlocked airflow potential that the factory never even attempted to use. With a simple cam swap, a better intake manifold, and higher compression pistons, a smog-era 460 that made 220 horsepower could jump to over 400 without even touching forced induction. The transformation was almost magical. Add aluminum cylinder heads from companies that understood what this architecture could do. Rebuild with 10.5.1 compression using modern pistons. Install a camshaft designed for power instead of emissions compliance. Suddenly you're looking at 500 horsepower naturally aspirated. Torque well over 550 lb-ft across a broad power band that pulled like a locomotive from 2,000 RPM to 6,000. And it wasn't fragile. It didn't need constant attention. It didn't blow head gaskets at the first sign of abuse. Drag racers in the 1980s started building 460-based engines into displacement monsters that would have shocked the original designers. Using aftermarket crankshafts with 4.3-inch strokes, they created 514 cubic inch combinations that became common in sportsman racing. Some builds pushed past 550 cubic inches. A few dedicated builders went beyond 600 cubic inches with custom blocks. Quarter-mile times dropped into the 10s, then the 9s, then the 8s, in heavy Fox-body Mustangs and full-size Fords that had absolutely no business moving that fast. But the 460 never got the spotlight like Chevrolet's 454 or Chrysler's 426 Hemi. Why? Because it never had its Le Mans moment. It never had a factory-backed racing program that put it on magazine covers. It never had a halo car that made teenagers tape posters to their walls. Ford's racing focus had shifted to small blocks, and later to the modular engines that would define the next generation. Marketing budgets went elsewhere. Attention went elsewhere. The 460 was always the workhorse, the engine that towed the race car to the track. Not the one screaming toward the checkered flag. The engine under the hood of the support truck, not the trophy winner. And yet, by the 1980s, in Ford trucks and commercial vehicles, the 460 was absolutely king. There was no debate. In 1987, fuel-injected versions arrived with sequential electronic engine control that finally brought the big block into the modern era. Horsepower ratings hovered around 230 at the crank, but torque climbed near 390 lb-ft with a much flatter curve than carbureted versions could achieve. Throttle response improved dramatically. Cold start behavior improved. Reliability improved. These engines powered F-350s, pulling gooseneck trailers, ambulances responding to emergencies, RVs crossing the continent, commercial haulers that put on 100,000 miles a year, millions of miles accumulated across North America, brutal duty cycles, desert heat in Arizona summers, mountain grades in Colorado winters, stop-and-go traffic in Houston, frozen cold starts in Alberta. They just kept going. Production of the 460 in trucks continued all the way until 1997, nearly 3 decades of continuous production. Think about that span of time. From the height of muscle cars when engines were measured in cubic inches and quarter-mile times, to the dawn of the modular Triton V8 when computers controlled everything. But here's the irony that explains everything. The very things that kept it alive for 30 years, low RPM operation, truck duty, emissions tuning, durability focus, also kept it out of legend status. It never got the romantic story that sells books and documentaries. No 24 hours of Le Mans victory. No Daytona 500 glory with champagne and confetti. No famous driver interviews saying, "That engine saved us when nothing else could." Instead, it quietly hauled fifth-wheel trailers across Arizona in 110-degree heat without complaint. It pulled construction equipment through Alberta winters where lesser engines cracked blocks. It powered motorhomes coast to coast for families making memories. It got farmers to their fields and contractors to their job sites. It did the hard work that nobody celebrates, and in doing so, it got left behind in the mythology that car culture loves to create. By the late 1990s, Ford replaced it with the 6.8-liter V10 Triton and later modular V8 designs. Lighter engines, more efficient combustion, better emissions compliance, more compatible with modern electronics and fuel delivery systems. The 460 was simply too big, too thirsty, too old school for a world obsessed with fuel economy ratings and ever-tightening regulations. Tooling was retired. The Lima plant moved on. Production ended, just like that. But the aftermarket never forgot what was buried in those smog-era compromises. Today, 460-based crate engines regularly produce 500 to 700 horsepower with reliability that rivals any modern performance engine. Stroker kits are common and well documented. The block design can safely handle massive torque when built correctly with modern components. Drag boats that need low-end thrust love it. Mud trucks that need torque at low RPM love it. Street rods looking for something different than the usual Chevrolet small block love it. Because underneath all the emissions equipment and detuned calibrations was a fundamentally overbuilt design waiting to be awakened. So why does the 460 matter? Because it represents the exact moment Detroit changed forever. It was born in the final years of true high-compression American excess, when engineers could still design for power first. It survived the emissions crackdown that killed so many other engines. It adapted to fuel injection when carburetors became obsolete. It carried the weight of trucks and motorhomes and ambulances for decades without complaint. It never became a racing icon, but it became something more important for the people who used it. Dependable power, unbreakable power. Power you could count on when failure wasn't an option. The engine that should have been a muscle car terror instead became America's heavy lifter. The engine that should have dominated drag strips instead dominated job sites and campgrounds and highways that stretched to the horizon. And maybe that's why it feels forgotten. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded at the wrong thing, in the wrong era, for the wrong audience. 460 cubic inches, a 4.36-inch bore, a 3.85-inch stroke. Torque that could twist drive shafts in half if you weren't careful. Detuned, restricted, underestimated by everyone who only read the spec sheet, and still standing strong after 200,000 miles of abuse that would have destroyed anything less. That's not a failure. That's resilience. That's the 460. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Ford's most overlooked giants, let me know what engine you want to see next. Another forgotten big block, a legendary rivalry that shaped an era, or a machine that almost changed everything before circumstances intervened. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because sometimes the engines that get left behind are the ones worth remembering most.